we've been discussing over the last day and a half really is how motorsport will look in the future, whether it's going to be the end of the internal combustion engine or whether it's going to continue as we move on in the next decade or so. And I think the next discussion here is really going to answer that question when it comes to Formula One, because we have the CEO of Motorsport Network, James Allen, standing by to lead that chat. What will Formula One look like in the future? Well, James, it's a tricky one, and it's over to you.
Yes, it's certainly one. I spend an awful lot of time thinking about what is the future shape of motorsport in general and Formula One in particular, Bryn. But I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Yath Gangakumaran for this discussion, the Director of Strategy and Business Development at Formula One. So good afternoon to Yath, and good afternoon to all of you following this. And I hope you're enjoying the ASI Connect and picking up plenty of useful information and contacts. Now, Yath is going to discuss Formula One's future strategy roadmap. He's going to give us some details of the overarching #WeRaceAsOne initiative. And this is, as you probably know, going to be the official platform for Formula One's environment, social and corporate governance policy. It's going to shape the upcoming 2021 season and beyond. Now, in this space, as Yath is always keen to say, a lot of people talk, but what really counts is actions. So we're going to talk about what the actions will be from Formula One this season and going beyond. And there is so much to unpack here. We'd love to have your questions and your points, so please do submit them to us and we'll get through them towards the end of the session. But there's all the reasons why Formula One is doubling down, for example, on hybrid internal combustion engines and sustainable fuels, the push for more diversity in the sport. Many, many fascinating topics. Yath, first of all, welcome to ASI Connect.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Now, #WeRaceAsOne has been adopted as the official environment, social and corporate governance policy for Formula One, as I mentioned, with those three key pillars, which is sustainability, diversity, and inclusion and community. So can you tell us a little bit more about how the policy has evolved from the launch through to where we are now going into this 2021 season?
Sure, yeah. So we launched our overall ESG strategy in November 2019, and 2020 was really going to be a year where we'd start to push through on the execution of our plan. Obviously, with COVID hitting and with the increased emphasis around racial equality through Black Lives Matter, we wanted to double down on our diversity and inclusion strategy, but also see if we as a sport could play our part in the fight against coronavirus. So the strategy is broadly still the same in terms of looking to be net zero carbon as a sport by 2030, have all races as sustainable events by 2025, and to have a Formula One that reflects the diverse world in which we race in going into the future. But we also wanted to ensure from a community perspective that we used our resources to help against the fight against the pandemic, hence Project Pit Lane, where the teams got together to produce ventilators and other equipment to support the NHS and other healthcare providers around the world. And we've definitely doubled down on the investment and the pace at which we are executing on diversity and inclusion, given what happened last year.
What's your feedback from the fans telling you, Yath, about how the program's been received, the general overall concept of it? Because it's certainly not something that ever really appeared in Formula One in the past. And what about whether the message is actually cutting through? Because I know you do a lot of fan voice, audience survey and listening. What are they telling you?
It's been really positive, actually. So 65% of our fans view us more positively because we now have this plan in place. And in fact, when we launched the strategy back in November 2019, we do what's known as sentiment tracking, where we see how different campaigns that we launch are viewed. And our ESG launch was our most positively received launch since Liberty Media took over Formula One in 2017. So it's been really positively received. We're starting to see people who have typically not been Formula One fans starting to be engaged with us, particularly from a younger perspective. But what's really key is that we continue to build on this momentum, and things like sustainable fuels coming in and showcasing to the world the impact that they can have will hopefully mean that we can be even more popular and even more relevant. And our fans, our current fans, can feel even prouder to be fans of Formula One.
And this is quite important, isn't it, Yath? Because I think your own data shows you that something like 60% of the new fans that have come in to Formula One since Liberty Media took over are under the age of 35, for whom these topics are absolutely critical. It's not just good enough for them for sport's sake anymore. These topics need to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there's a broader trend with younger people to be less interested in sport relative to other genres like, say, music, film, fashion, etc., compared to older people. And so the fact that we can still resonate outside of the sort of the sporting entertainment field is important in terms of trying to bring them on the journey of becoming Formula One fans.
So let's drill down a little bit deeper, shall we? I mean, we've obviously had a fascinating discussion already during this ASI Connect about future power. But when you and I spoke on the hashtag Thinking Forward Thought Leadership series on motorsport.com last year, you said we're doubling down on hybrid with sustainable fuels. Now, tell us a little bit about why that is the right strategy for Formula One.
Sure. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to performance, relevance to the wider automotive industry, and then just sort of general interest from existing and prospective OEMs in terms of being part of Formula One. So with the first one, which is most important, performance, we are the pinnacle of motorsport. And to remain the pinnacle of motorsport, we need to ensure that our cars are the quickest on track and can go the distances, 300 kilometers per race, the distances required each race weekend. And looking at other forms of propulsion, there's nothing else that can really meet our requirements from a performance perspective other than hybrid engines. And then the sustainable fuels piece comes in with our second pillar, which is all about relevance and sustainability. We want to make sure that when people look at F1, they feel that it is a sport that is relevant not just to today, but will be relevant for the next 10 plus years. And whilst there's an awful lot of discussion around other forms of propulsion, actually, if you look at the global car park, 99% of the over 1 billion vehicles on the planet have an internal combustion engine in them. And people are going to be driving their cars for still another 10, 15 years before they look to change up. So how can we as a sport act as a platform and as a catalyst to showcase to the wider automotive industry that you can actually make internal combustion engines cleaner by having them powered by 100% advanced sustainable fuels? And that's why we're really focusing on developing these sustainable fuels, because they can be good from an environmental perspective, not just for us, but more importantly for the wider automotive industry. And then that leads to our third pillar, which is, okay, well, how do we continue to engage our existing OEMs and also try and bring in new OEMs? And as you may have seen in the press, there's obviously a lot of interest in being part of the next generation of Formula One with the 2025 hybrid and 100% sustainable fuels.
Staying on the topic of sustainability, of course, it's not just the fuels and the internal combustion engines in the racing cars. That's actually a tiny percentage of it. But you're obviously aiming to have sustainable events by 2025. How are you going to achieve that?
That's right, yeah. And so we're looking to work with all of our promoters, all 23 of them, to ensure that we can collaborate to meet the ambitious targets we've set around events. When we talk about sustainable events by 2025, we don't just mean carbon emissions, we also mean wider elements of sustainability, such as waste and recycling, biodiversity, even considering things like social inclusion. So we've been putting together plans with all of our promoters. And this year, one of the big things that we're executing on is a dramatic reduction in single-use plastics within the pit and paddock. We control the pit and paddock, so we have more of an opportunity to impact that short term. And we've got all 10 teams, the FIA and Pirelli, to agree to this as well. So actually from Bahrain testing, you're going to see different operations in place from the vast majority of us. And actually come Spain, all of the members that I just mentioned will have plans in place to ensure there's dramatic reduction in single-use plastic bottles, but also cutlery and crockeries when you go to canteens, etc. At the same time, our promoters are also working on their plans to ensure in future fan zones and the wider circuit can also reduce their single-use plastics. In fact, Bahrain this year is implementing recycling and is invested in recycling infrastructure for the first time ever. And they're not just going to do that for the F1 race, but they're going to do it year round, which is a nice sort of small example of how we as a sport can have a positive impact in a location, not just when we're there for the week or so, but actually beyond our time in that country.
Of course, these are things that are perhaps less visible to the fans watching on TV. When we come on to the sort of diversity and inclusion topic, one of the things that was very noticeable for the fans last year was the drivers' anti-racism gesture before the Grand Prix. There was a lot of talk around that and throughout the season. What are the plans for 2021? What will the fans be seeing?
Yeah, so 2021, the focus really is on executing on our plan. 2020 was all about showcasing to the world that we take this topic very seriously. 21 is to show we're not just all talk, we're going to execute on our actions as well. So you're going to see a number of different initiatives be launched. First, from a job creation perspective, we'll be launching within F1 opportunities, internships, apprenticeships, traineeships for people from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds to work in our organization within different departments. And we're really focused on ensuring that this experience isn't just a box ticking exercise, but actually it's one where they will gain qualities and skills that can be transferable to other organizations if, say, they don't end up with a full-time job with us. So, for example, in finance, how can we actually train them up with financial qualifications so that best case scenario, they end up working for us long term. But if not, they have these financial qualifications they can actually take to another employer and hopefully find it very easy to move into the job market. So that's number one in terms of job opportunities within our company. Two is scholarships. We'll be launching for the first time engineering scholarships for talented young students from diverse backgrounds, where we will be paying their full tuition fees across their degree and also providing them with a living stipend each year so that they don't have to go and get a job whilst they're studying. And we're working with all of the teams to ensure that these scholars are then given work experience opportunities at the team. So it provides that pathway into a Formula One career where potentially they may not have thought that there was an opportunity there. We also have the partnership with W Series, which we've expanded for this year. All of their races are going to be within our race weekends. We're going to look to elevate the talented female drivers coming through the ranks. But we're also trying to look at things on a more systemic basis. So we're working with the FIA to look at what we can do in karting to make it much more accessible and meritocratic. As you well know, and lots of people know, it's very, very expensive. And we want to fundamentally change that. And then linked to that, we're also looking at studies, which Pat Simmons is leading on, to understand the amount of effort, the amount of force required by drivers at different stages of the karting ladder, and whether or not there's actually a sort of unconscious bias and a competitive disadvantage for certain cohorts versus others. So, for example, it's actually easier to drive an F1 car than it is to drive an F2 and F3 car in terms of the amount of force required. We need to start looking into the data here. And if that's the case across the ecosystem, what can we do with the FIA to introduce new regulations which can remove some of that uncompetitive, that sort of competitive disadvantage for certain cohorts? So quite a lot happening on the D&I front.
Definitely, and I'll come back and ask you about what will be visible in terms of pre-race gestures from anti-racism messages and stuff like that in a second. But before I do, actually on this very topic, I've got a question that's been put in from one of the delegates here, from Kit, saying mainly due to diversity and inclusivity aspect, do you feel that the focus of change should originate from the top level of F1 management or via developing strategies at grassroots level?
I think it's a bit of both, actually. I think top-down is helpful in that if, Stefano Domenicali, Jean Todt say, we want to do this within this sport, then people will listen because, they're the big bosses. But also it's important that this is a space where it's not really for one or two people to determine what happens. Actually, we can all as individuals make positive change. And so where there are strategies developed at a more grassroots level, actually we should be looking to foster them. And there's a number of different things actually that have been happening within our company around the wider ESG sphere, which have actually been developed by people who aren't at the executive level. So for example, all of our lanyards that we give out to our staff, to people in the pits and paddock, as of last year, were made from recycled plastic bottles, and that's the same thing. Same thing's happening this year. that idea didn't originate from myself or from Chase at the time. It came from someone in our design team. And we thought that's a great idea. Let's look to execute it. So I think it's a bit of both. And I think there's a lot of merit in it happening both ways. One, in terms of making sure people execute if the big bosses are saying it. Two, in terms of ensuring there's wider engagement and interest if everyone feels as if they have an opportunity to make a difference.
And coming back to the topic of the driver's gesture, if you like, the anti-racism gesture before the race, in football Premier League, they're still doing that into the new season. Will the drivers? Is it up to the drivers to organise that, or is Formula One going to organise it?
So we're actually sitting down with the drivers in the next few days to discuss what we want to do pre-race. I think it's an important moment because you've got millions of people around the world excited to watch an F1 race. We've got a large captive audience there. So we do want to continue to showcase to the world that we're taking these issues very seriously. What that looks like, as I said, is being discussed, and Stefano will be speaking to the drivers in Bahrain in the next few days about that.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, Yath, the W Series, which you're supporting. They would have been racing on your program last year, but unfortunately had to cancel. But they're very much on the program this season, which is terrific. But how much is Formula One willing and able to push to have a realistic chance of a female driver making it all the way through to Formula One? And what would that mean for the series?
It's a good question. I think, well, in terms of what it would mean for us, I think it'd be fantastic. Being able to have a female driver competing against the men in what has been viewed as a male-dominated sport will be fantastic in terms of engaging fans. We'll bring new fans in. I think it'll be great commercially as well. It's just a win-win story. In terms of what we can do about it, I think there's a balance to be struck in that, we're ultimately the commercial rights holder for the Formula One World Championship. It's not for us to tell the teams who they need to select to drive. It's for the teams to determine that themselves. And as you've seen from the likes of Williams and Ferrari with their Girls on Track program with the FIA, the teams are pushing to support more up and coming female drivers. I think for us, what we feel we can potentially make an impact working with the FIA is looking at that grassroots level and the systemic issues stopping female drivers from actually coming through. From the stats that I've seen, only 1.5% of karters are females. So you're already starting from a much lower base. What can we do together with the FIA, using our global platform to encourage more girls to take part in karting? And then to the point I made earlier, how do we remove any unconscious bias and any competitive disadvantage that has been in play for the last few decades in karting to ensure it's more of a level playing field?
Now, one of the activities that Formula One has been engaged in for many years, where it's been involved with diversity, lots of female participation, ethnic minority participation, and as well touching STEM topics from an educational point of view, is F1 in schools. And quick disclaimer, I've been a patron of it for 20 years. A fantastic event, seen it grow. And many girls have competed, they've won, people from all over the world. That has for many years been, I guess, Formula One's CSR project. Now, obviously, you're layering up with so much more in this race as one strategy. But how does F1 in schools program evolve now?
You're right, James. I mean, F1 in schools has been a fantastic program. We have over 1 million students having the opportunity to participate in it each year. And I think a couple of years ago, 40% of the finalists were female, and the finalists came from over a dozen countries. So it's a really global, diverse program. We're really proud of it. I think for us, the key is how can we make it even more accessible? So how can we much more increase the number of participants from that million number? How do we grow that at 10x? And then also, it's a secondary school focused STEM competition. Actually, a lot of young people make their choices around what they want to do, or have their choices limited, should we say, by what they want to do based on their decisions about what subjects they choose at GCSE level. So actually, what we're looking at is, can we start a bit earlier and engage young people with STEM subjects via F1 in schools at a younger age, so that hopefully more of them decide to do the sciences, maths, etc., not just at GCSE, but into A-level and beyond. So it's about broadening access more generally, and looking maybe to start at a younger age, so we can engage people before they've made decisions that may block them from moving into STEM.
Okay. Questions coming in from our delegates. We've got one here from Cedric, who says, how's the mobility shift towards autonomous and shared vehicles going to impact the interest of youngsters in Formula One and motorsport in general? What are your views on that?
Yes, it's an interesting question. I think what we have found is that lots of people start following F1 at a young age before they even know what it feels like to drive, or even know that they want to drive. Often it's passed down from parents, or they just pick it up because it's part of culture. So the reasons why people follow Formula One in the first place aren't because they're actually drivers at the moment, and so they want to see how the best drivers in the world do. It's more because there are wider elements of why people are excited about sports. It's a really, it's an adrenaline pumping sport. It's dangerous. It's exciting. It travels around the world. So those aspects will still remain, which is why we're hopeful that we'll continue to see good interest in F1 from younger people. As you mentioned earlier, the majority of our new fans are coming from younger age groups. But at the same time, we are doubling down in terms of moving into areas where younger people are spending more of their time. So esports has been a big win for us, obviously social media, mobile gaming more generally, doing more in the music world with certain artists, looking to work with influencers more. So there is a very robust plan that we have in place to proactively engage with young people outside actually of the race weekend itself, and still before they even consider whether they want to drive or not.
One of the things that's been fantastic, Yath, for bringing new fans into Formula One, without a shadow of a doubt, is the Netflix series Drive to Survive. Season 3 is about to kick off, so I'm sure we've all seen the trailers. I can't wait to watch it, and there'll be a lot of binge watching going on over the next few weeks. But I just want to ask you, I was a bit surprised, if I'm honest, last year with the last season, that they didn't have any kind of messaging around, We Race as One, diversity, inclusion. It just wasn't really the whole sense of purpose around all that motorsport and Formula One does for wider society. It wasn't really touched on. I guess on one level you can understand why, because it's about personalities. But given that you've pushed this agenda so hard over the course of last season, will it feature in this series at all? Even just like little positioning notes or something? Will it feature at all in this series?
One of the reasons why we believe Drive to Survive has been such a success is because we've allowed the Netflix team to have editorial control. So they determine what goes into Drive to Survive. We don't want to have any say in terms of what could be good for us, what might not work well for us. So the reason I say that is we'll have to wait and see, actually. I don't know the answer to that. They obviously know that it's been a huge part of what's been happening within Formula One and the wider world, and obviously with the world champion being a big ambassador for this. So I don't know. I look forward to finding out, 8 days time when it launches, just like you. So let's see. But I think it's going to be the most exciting season yet, for sure.
Well, I sent Paul, the producer from the production company last year, a little note saying, please make sure you include this in the next series. So we'll see whether he listened or not. I'm sure I wasn't the only one. You mentioned Lewis Hamilton, a very important ambassador, obviously, for your diversity and inclusion agenda. And obviously, it'll be a bit more tricky when he isn't racing anymore. How much does he help you? And are you a bit concerned as things stand? He's only signed up for one more year.
Well, Lewis is a great ambassador. He's an amazing role model for the sport, but also for lots of people around the world. And we're really proud of the stance that he's taken, and actually the way that he's sort of developed as not just as a driver, but as a person in the last decade or so. We are actively working with the Hamilton Commission that Lewis set up, looking at some of the barriers to entry for people from diverse communities. So you'll be seeing more about the findings, but also the actions that we're implementing in the coming months. In terms of when he goes, it will be a sad day. I'm obviously a Brit, so I love it when British drivers do well. It'll be a sad day when Lewis does eventually decide to retire. But the thing that we're really excited about is I don't think we've ever had such a good, and you're a historian here when it comes to F1, your stuff, James, but I don't think we've actually had such a strong youthful grid before in the history of F1. So it'd be a shame certainly when Lewis goes, but the idea of Max against George, against Charles, against Lando, obviously Mick coming through. There's Lance has been doing really well. There's actually a lot of excitement around the potential for future battles and personalities to really be driven and then take on that mantle that Lewis has been holding for the last several years.
It's really funny you say that. My 16-year-old said to me the other day, Dad, I am really looking forward to this season of Formula One. And I said, why? Why this one in particular? He said, because it's the first time I can remember that young drivers are established drivers. And I thought, okay, I wouldn't even thought of that, but he's totally, that's the thing that's really, really exciting him about this season. I think it's a very, very good point. Okay, well, we've got just about 4 minutes left in the session, Yath, but we've got a number of questions that have come into the delegates. So let's try and get through them all, shall we? First, let's get into the hard-hitting one. Will the inclusion of Nikita Mazepin in Formula One devalue the brand and make a mockery of the strapline, #WeRaceAsOne, #WeSayNoToMazepin? That's from James.
Well, what happened was a terrible situation. We've made our views clear about it. I think the Haas team have dealt with it internally. What's really important is how the drivers act going forward. And as I've sort of insinuated earlier, Stefano is sitting down with the drivers in the next few days in Bahrain, where actually the focus is very much about how they are positive ambassadors for the sport. So we are going to be reinforcing the role they play. Being a Formula One driver means you're obviously put on a pedestal, and there are millions of people around the world who'd love to be in their position. We're hopeful that they will act as very positive role models going forward.
Okay, we've got one here from Harry. What's being done to address the rising cost of being a spectator? Tickets are very expensive and TV coverage is now pretty much behind an expensive paywall. This doesn't help diversity and inclusion on the spectator point of view.
Yeah, it's a good question. We know that attending an F1 event, can be expensive, and it's slightly different, obviously, in that you're paying for 3 days and several hours worth of content across a weekend versus, say, a football match, which is sort of just 90 minutes on one day. But that being said, it's still a significant outlay. As part of our second pillar about sustainable events by 2025, a key component is working with each of the promoters to see where we can ensure that people from the local community, particularly from underprivileged backgrounds, are able to access the event at either a heavily discounted rate or free of charge. So that's something that is being worked through with the different promoters. It will take time, and obviously, everyone's coming out of a coronavirus situation, which is really hit hard event operators. But that is something that we are working on with the promoters as we head towards our meeting our goals for 2025.
And a couple more questions we've just got time for. One here from Adrian. Will historic racing form part of the pre-race lineup for future F1 race days?
It's something we have thought about, actually. We know how popular the likes of Goodwood is, and obviously when the historic cars are up at Silverstone, I think we need to see how to make it work at each race, or if it's something that just happens as a one-off, and also the cost related to it. Obviously, if any of these cars get damaged, there's a big insurance bill at the end of it. It's something that we know there's a lot of interest in. So we have thought about it. I wouldn't say it's a priority right now, because obviously we're trying to get through a season where coronavirus is still front and center, but it is something we have discussed in the past.
Okay, and finally, Yath, we have from the questions from the delegates, one from Michaela, and this says, related to what Extreme E is doing, being proactive regarding sustainability in the different countries that they travel to, are there plans for Formula One to include the local culture at each race?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We actually do that already. It probably just doesn't get picked up so much on the broadcast side. So I remember going to, say, Azerbaijan a couple of years ago, and within the fan area, there's an Azerbaijan corner where you can get to taste sort of local food and understand the culture a bit better. Our race promotion team has been working on a food festival concept where you have food from some of the different locations that we go to in one location. So say, for example, you're in Silverstone, could there be Mexican food there because of our connection to the Mexican race? And could there be food from China, etc., because of our Chinese Grand Prix race, etc.? But we are looking to do more actually on a local level with local businesses. And I think that will mean that you'll see more in terms of local culture coming through again in the months and years to come.
Fantastic. Well, we're out of time, Yath, and so many fascinating topics within this hashtag We Race as One banner. Thank you very much for taking the time out to explain it all to us today. Thanks for showing us that actions speak louder than words, and very, very best of luck with the 2021 season.
Thank you, James. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to Bryn.
Thank you very much, James. A brilliant chat. It's so all-encompassing, isn't it, to see where Formula One will be. James, something that strikes me there, as you were saying about the drivers on the grid at the moment, there have never been so many young drivers that are experienced drivers. From your point of view, do you think that having so many young drivers that are also experienced drivers helps appeal to the young drivers because they have that close social media contact that was never there before?
I think there's no question about it. I mean, since Liberty Media came over, the one thing that they changed was, first of all, was the digital approach, because there wasn't really one previously, and that's obviously low-hanging fruit, and they've done it very, very well. I mean, the Netflix Drive to Survive thing has been a fantastic funnel for new fans, but if you look at the work that's gone on in the last 3 years on the digital and social media side, it's fantastic. And I think Yath will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the data from last season shows it's the second fastest growing sport on digital and social media in the world, and a lot of other series that fell by the wayside in last year. And I think that's right. I think it's the Norrises, the Leclercs, the Verstappens who are, they're digital natives. They've not known a world without an iPhone in their hand. And they're very adept at using it and using imagery and video. And the teams have got better as well. Everybody has. So the boats are all rising on the rising tide. And it's just super exciting, I think, because young drivers try harder, they take more risks. They're exciting, they're fresh, and they're brilliant communicators. So it's all positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, gents, I'll let you run away because the time is running out. But James and Yath, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I, for one, as an F1 fan, and of course, being a true Brit and hoping that Lewis Hamilton secures number 8 by the time we get to the end of this season, even though I am obviously impartial all the way. Now we are going to take a little pause here before we have our final session of Autosport International Connect. I cannot believe that we've got to the end of it already. It seems just a few moments ago we kicked things off, but there you go. You have got around about, I'm looking at the time down here, 3:30 to the next session, so you've got a good 40 minutes or so to get networking before the next session starts. So use this time, have a look around on the app, have a look around on your desktop, and you can use the exhibitor booths. You can have a look around as well and get in touch with any of the other attendees. You'll find a lot of their social media details, whether that be LinkedIn, etc. Particularly for the speakers, you'll find their details on their speaker profiles, and it is all there for you on the app. And if you want to get in touch with us on social media, use the hashtag ASI Connect. We'll see you back here at 3:30. The next session, the final session really of the day, is all about what's next for safety. Very, very pertinent really when it comes to Formula One and the top levels of motorsport. But of course it filters through to all levels of motorsport and then into our everyday lives. So I cannot wait for that one. It's coming up at 3:30.